What's the biggest mistake we make as speakers?
That's such a great question. But let me just share this as you're listening. No one cares. If you could summarize everything you know about what you know, your area of expertise, and put it in 22 words, what would your 22 words be? I'm sorry, you have failed the test.
This podcast is for you if you want to make a difference in the world and you feel that you are a messenger on a mission because you have something inside of you that can't wait to share with others. And if that's you, you're in the right place today. Here's a question for you to think of. Imagine you get a phone call today requesting that you speak at an event tomorrow to an audience of 75 of your ideal prospective customers and clients. What would you say? Hopefully you would say yes, but would you be prepared, confident of your results, joyful about this wonderful opportunity? Hopefully, again, you would say yes to all of those so you could grow your business as well as spread your message. Using speaking to get your message out and grow your business is a wonderful skill set to possess and to keep improving. I know from my own personal experience how valuable speaking effectively can be for you to open many doors. As good as you are now, you can always get better. Two of our recent guests on this podcast, Sandra Scheinbaum and Barry Goldstein, have hired Joel Weldon as their personal speaking skills coach. Joe is a Hall of Fame professional speaker with over 3,000 paid talks and has personally coached and critiqued well over 10,000 thought leaders, business owners, and entrepreneurs. Joel is also the creator of the Ultimate Speaking System, an online speaking skills system with one-to-one coaching. When I heard of all these accomplishments, I asked Joel, with all that you've done as a professional speaker and speaking skills coach, how old are you? He smiled at me and said, let's put it this way. My social security number is 5. Yes, Joel has been around a long time, but he's built his career and his speaking skills coaching on timeless truths that don't change, even as the world around us is changing. He's got more energy than people half his age and has adapted so well to the changing world we all live in now. I have asked Joel to share specific ideas in this conversation with you today to help you take your communication and speaking skills to an even higher level so you get your message out with clarity and impact. Joel's tagline is Speaking Made Simple, how to be an even better speaker. And today's podcast is about using speaking to get your message out. Welcome to our podcast, Joel.
Thank you, Susan. And what a joy to be with you, and especially you as you're listening, since you have a message and you're on a mission to deliver that message. So how do you do it? So what would you like to talk about, Susan?
Oh boy, we don't have all day, and I know you and I could talk all day about this subject with all the history and gems and pearls of wisdom that you have to share. But I think the first thing that I would want to know is, what's the biggest mistake we make as speakers?
Oh, that's such a great question. Well, there's a lot of things that ordinary people use and do when they make a presentation. And when we're talking about speaking, that could be on a video, it could be on an audio, it could be live, it could be virtual, it could be a podcast, it could be a webinar, it could be a video for their website, it could be many different things. It could be at a trade show. All of that is speaking and communicating. And I think the biggest mistake people make is they use one word. It's not a dirty word. It's actually the most frequently used word in the world. Now, as an author and a book publisher and a writer, Susan, I know you know what this word is. And unfortunately, this is the mistake the ordinary speakers make, is they open with this word. So let me give you an example of how so many people open a message. Or like this podcast, it would be, oh, Susan, I'm so excited to be here. I've got so many ideas that I want to share with your members and your listeners because they have a mission. They got a message that they want to get out and they're just driven by it. And I know how much I can help them. So did you pick up the word? That's the biggest mistake that speakers make.
The specific thought that I have is it's all about them.
That's right. And that word is I.
Yeah.
So if you could switch that, and the way you switch that, I'm going to put a little sign up. I don't know if you could read it. It's kind of small.
I can. It says you.
Oh, it's you. Yes. So that's the first suggestion as you're listening to this podcast. Open about them. So how do you do that? You're here because, and then whatever your subject is, because XYZ is so important to you. And as a business owner, an entrepreneur, and a successful person, you know that XYZ, if you use it effectively, can be very helpful. And that's what you're going to learn in this podcast, how XYZ can help you take your business to the next level. And you can be happier, and you can be healthier, and you can be so much more excited about what you're doing every day. Does that sound like a good plan for you?
Yeah, it's the WIFM, isn't
That's
it?
right. And
You
tell
know,
us
which has
what
been around for a long time.
And what does WIIFM mean?
What's in it for me?
What's in it for me? So that's the biggest mistake I see speakers make, is they make it about them.
Yeah.
They think their personal story is important. But let me just share this as you're listening. No one cares unless your personal story can help them meet a need that they have, or overcome a fear or a worry or concern that they have, or can reinforce something they're doing and help them take it to an even higher level. But no one cares about you. You are a messenger with a message. What they care about is the message.
Yes.
And if you can get yourself out of the way, and that's maybe the second mistake that people make, is they get nervous. They get scared. And we know, if you look at that book of lists, Susan, you're familiar with, in the top 10 all the time in that book of lists of the things people are afraid of most, speaking in front of a group.
Yep.
You know Jerry Seinfeld, right? The comedian?
Yes.
He has a wonderful line. At a funeral, the person giving the eulogy would rather be in the casket. In other words, death is better than standing up in front of a live audience and speaking. And so why is that? So let me give you a hypothetical situation. Susan, just imagine you're driving on a country road up there in the Pacific.
I got a lot of those around here.
The Pacific Northwest. It's at night, and you're going to an important event, and you're dressed up for dinner, and you look really terrific, but you see there's an accident ahead. A car has crashed into a tree, and a woman is laying in the road bleeding from a leg wound. Would you just drive by that, or would you stop?
Oh, I would stop.
Would you do something to try and maybe stop the bleeding or help this woman?
Yeah, definitely console her, call for help.
Call for help. Okay. And let's say do you know any first aid?
Not much, but I would know enough to be able to like wrap a bandage, or like.
Okay. So you'd put maybe wrap a tourniquet and get some kind of a
Yes.
rag or something and do that. But would you first think, well, I'm going to get blood on my dress and my shoes. How am I going to go to that event tonight if I'm covered? What? You just shook your head. What do you mean?
I wouldn't be thinking that, because I would be in a proactive help this person mode.
Oh, so you wouldn't be thinking of yourself at all.
No.
Okay. And that's the key to being an effective speaker, is if you could get yourself out of the way. Because when people are nervous or uncomfortable speaking, it's because they're self-conscious.
Mm-hmm.
And what does self-conscious mean? Being focused on you. But when you help that woman in this hypothetical illustration, you were totally selfless. You said, because we haven't talked about this, you answered naturally, I would be just fully focused on helping her.
Yeah.
And what if you spoke that way? If you were so fully focused on getting that message that you have a mission to get out and how it's going to benefit your listeners, and forget about yourself.
Yeah.
And be you. And that's the other thing people think, well, I've got to be a speaker. I've got to be like Tony Robbins out there. The most powerful thing you could do is just be you. Yeah. It's been working all of these years. Why would you try to be somebody else? And think of how much effort it takes to be somebody you're not. It takes no effort.
Yeah, that's really such a beautiful point, Joel, because some of the conversations that we've had here is about the fear of being seen. I mean, I actually struggle with that because I'm an introvert and I'm much better, which is why I help people write their books. I'm much better about understanding how to get things out in print, to get the message down, to get it written, to get it published, than I am to say it. And it's really been something I've needed to work on as a person, like personal growth, to recognize exactly what you're saying is that I know there's people who need to hear from me, and I've got to get past myself and my own fears and my own stuff and just focus on them to get out there. But that's a very common fear, just like you brought up with Jerry Seinfeld and his joke. Most people don't want to be in front of people. There are a few people that love to be on stage, and they would much rather be a speaker than they would be to write a book. And here's a funny thing. When people come to me and they talk about a message and that they want help getting the message out, I always say all authors should be speakers and all speakers should be authors. But we typically fall into one camp or the other in terms of our comfort level.
Well, that's very true. And if you think about that, if you truly are listening to this because you're a messenger on a mission, what does that mean? A messenger means you're carrying something, which is your knowledge, your wisdom, your experience, your insights. And you've seen that that knowledge or insights or wisdom that you have has blessed and helped other people. And now you want to broaden that. You want to spread that. That's your mission, to get that out to more people. And that's the power of speaking, to put it on a video, to put it on a podcast like this, to do it at a live event or a virtual event and share that. And then make it all about them, not about you. And if you just think how often people use that. So I'm going to tell you, this is my favorite story, and I love telling this story.
Tell me a story.
All right. But what did I just say? I'm going to tell you a story. I just love the story. As a matter of fact, it's my favorite story. No one cares. It's not about you. So instead of saying that, you could say, here's a story that might become one of your favorites.
Oh, I like that.
In this story, you're going to hear how a person, much like you, facing the same challenges you had, was able to do two things that turned a negative into a positive. So here's the story. Okay, so that's the way to set up a story. But what does the ordinary speaker say? I just love telling this story. It's my favorite story.
You're absolutely right. Yes.
So get that out of the way. That's your assignment. Get that out of the way. Now, here's your test. And this is because I'm going to give you some call to actions throughout our discussion. Look at an email that you wrote to a customer or a client or a prospect. Take a pen, print out that email that you wrote, and look at the first two paragraphs and circle how many I's and how many U's. Now, I's include me, mine, our. U's are you, your, you'll, you've, any of those personal pronouns, and just count them. If you're like most people, because I, as we said earlier, is the most frequently used word in the entire English language, one letter. And yet, as Susan said, there's that 5 letters that you need to be thinking about, WIIFM. which means it should be about them. So you could rewrite that letter and eliminate every I, me, or mine. Actually, you could write a 10-page letter and never use I one time once you see the power of putting you into that message. So just think about your emails. How do they begin? Susan, I need to know a couple of things about the podcast. I need to know who's going to be on your podcast. Another thing I need to know, how long are we going to talk? Another thing I need, okay, that's how most people write an email. So what if we just took that email that I just made up and said, Susan, your podcast is important. Your listeners are tuning in because they're messengers with a mission and they want to get a lot out of this. So how would you describe your typical listener to make sure that this message ties in to them? Another thing that would be important, how long do you want this discussion to go? I said basically exactly the same thing, but notice there was no I.
And that is the email that I got from you.
Well, you got to practice what you preach or you're a hypocrite.
That's right.
So as you're listening to this message, I want you to see who we're talking to. And there's one other thing about that. It's singular. Now, Susan, you and I are in a group of very experienced people at Genius Network.
Yes, we
are. So I think you will know this name, but as you're listening to watching this podcast, you might not know who Arthur Godfrey is or was. Susan, do you know who Arthur Godfrey was?
I think so.
Take a guess.
The name is very familiar. I'm trying to picture, like, was he on TV or on radio? But where was he?
Radio.
He
was the number one radio broadcaster in America, year after year. His show was always number one. And I remember as a young man listening to an interview where he was being asked, Arthur, how is it possible every year you're named the number one broadcaster out of all of these people on the radio? And the radio, of course, was much more used than television in those long days ago, back in the 40s and 50s and 60s, when he spoke. And he said these words, my secret is this. I talk to just one person, and their name is you. So he didn't say, so all of you out there in radio land. Now, I know many of you are probably in your car, and some of you might be at home. He never did that. He said, wherever you are, maybe in your car, maybe you're at home, or maybe you're at work. Wherever you are listening to this message, you're going to get some great ideas today. We have some wonderful guests that you're going to enjoy listening to. So that's another assignment for you. Take away the plural. The common expression today for people making presentations, you guys. Well, I don't know if you've noticed, Susan, you're not a guy.
That's true.
Yeah. So we should never say you guys. And the other reason is you're making it plural. So if you're at a live event and the speaker's on the stage and says, now you guys out there, the audience can think, oh, I think he's talking to this guy over here or that lady over there. But when you say you, it's directed at you. And you can embrace everybody in a singular way. So as an example, as you're listening, you might be a messenger with a mission that isn't as clear to you as you want it to be. Or perhaps you have spent a lot of time perfecting that message and it is crystal clear to you. So wherever you are on that scale, where it's not clear or it's very clear, this idea would be helpful for you. So I just covered everybody. Or you could say something like this. You might be new to your career. Maybe you've just started your business. Or maybe you've been in it for decades, 40 or 50 years. So whether you have a lot of experience or not much at all, these ideas will help you. You could be a man or maybe you're a woman. We just got everybody. Whatever you are, you're a human being. And you think that's what makes you special. So That's the power of using you. So
Yeah,
as you go ahead, Susan.
what I was going to say is, again, the similarities between writing and speaking are so similar because they have to tie in. I mean, if you have a message, you're doing it either by writing or by speaking. And one of the biggest issues I find with clients that I'm working with is they want their message to reach everybody. And so using that broad stroke rather than tying the writing in so that the person who's reading the book feels like the writer is speaking directly to them is very similar to what you're talking about.
Yes.
It's clarity, isn't it? It's having clarity.
And that's what you need to have. If you have a message that you want to get out, you need to know the very first question always. And before I give you that question, I'm going to illustrate it with a little example that Susan has no idea what's going to happen. But she's a smart lady. She can do it. So make believe you're sitting there with Susan and you're going to answer the questions because I can't hear what you're thinking right now. So Susan, just imagine, because in the introduction you said, imagine if our listener to this podcast got an invitation to talk to 75 people tomorrow, would they say yes? Well, you're going to get that invitation. And we're going to have you in front of 75 people tomorrow in a hotel right near where you live. And the subject they want you to talk about is safe driving, how to be a safe driver. So can you quickly, off the top of your head, pick out a couple of things that you should do or not do to be a safe driver? Go. Tell me what you would talk. Just give me the bullet points.
Be aware of the rules and the speed limits.
Okay, obey the speed limit. Know what it is. Good. What else?
Be an offensive driver. Watch what's happening around you. Don't
defensive
be
or offensive? Did you say?
I guess it would be defensive.
Defensive, yeah.
Defensive.
Okay.
Be aware of other drivers,
okay,
so that you're not hyper focused just on the road, but you have a broad view of what's happening around you.
Okay.
Wear your seatbelt.
Seatbelt. Okay. What should we be doing while we're driving? Could we be doing other things?
Like, absolutely not. No texting. No cell
text.
phone
Okay.
use. Yes.
All right. So now, as you're listening to this, would you say Susan's hit the points that you would say? Don't speed. Pay attention to what's going around. Maybe signal before you change lanes. Don't text. Don't drink. All of that. That's completely off track. I'm sorry, you have failed the test. Now, the reason is, if you had begun with the most important question any messenger on a mission needs to ask when they're going to make a presentation, which is the first question I asked you, who is the audience?
Oh, yes.
So now I just set this up. Tomorrow, you're going to be 75 people in a hotel near you up in the Pacific Northwest, and you're going to talk about safe driving. Joel, I'd love to do it. Now ask me the question, who is
your audience?
Oh, they are NASCAR drivers. And NASCAR has been having accidents on the track, and they want you to come in and talk about some safety points. So, Susan, let's review your message so far. Okay, obey the speed limit. So we're not going to speed anymore as NASCAR drivers. Yeah. We're going to make sure that we're not texting. You think at 160 miles an hour, they're doing a lot of texting and drinking? Do you think they forgot their seatbelts? No, nothing was relevant. Now, the reason I did that with you, Susan, everybody says the same thing. So here's another tool for you to think of. Before you make any kind of a presentation or write anything, you must start with, who is the audience?
Yes.
And once you knew that, in this case, you probably would have said, Joel, I don't think I can speak at that event because I don't really know how race car drivers could drive safely at those speeds. They probably need another speaker. Yes. Okay, but that's the key. So, you began this discussion. What are the mistakes people make when they speak? That's it. They don't know who the audience is. Mm-hmm. And they talk about things that aren't relevant. And you don't have to be dynamic. You don't have to have energy. You don't have to have humor, stories, any of that. If what you're saying is important and relevant to the people listening.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying this video filled with great conversation and stories. often when I'm working with clients, they have these great stories, but they're not sure how to put them in the book and connect it to how it's relevant. But problem solved. I've created a story mapper book for you, and it's completely free. Just follow the link below to get your free copy, or go to getsusansfreebook.com. I have a question. You brought up stories, and I have a question for you around that, but I also want to let people know who's listening or watching this podcast right now that if you hear some chirping in the background, that's because I have eight-week-old baby chickens in a cardboard box on the other end. This room is 1,000 square feet, and I'm on one end, and the chickens are on the other end because it's been too cold to put them out in their brand new coop. So if you hear the little chirping, I do have a cheering squad here for our podcast today.
Maybe they're saying you. Maybe they're saying you, not I.
There you go.
They've learned. They've listened.
You. So getting back, that was my quick little
about stories.
Story. So going back to writing, because most of the people I'm working with are in a business environment, and one of the mistakes they make is making it a very dry content where it's just about whatever their expert information, wisdom has gained. And the stories, just like so many that you've been telling here today, are what people remember when they can get a personal story that fits and demonstrates a point that's being made in the book. And that's kind of like a sticky thing. So we all know that when people are doing speaking engagements, we do want some stories in there it keeps people engaged. But a question that I've heard asked often, and there are people that fall into two different camps, is should you open your speech with a compelling story, or should you wait until later in your speech?
Well, that's a very good question. And there's two schools of thought. There's many speakers, and these are Hall of Fame speakers like myself, who open this way. And please help me welcome XYZ speaker. And they walk out on stage. There I was in Yosemite. A forest fire had just gone through. It was a freezing cold day in December. So that's opening with a story. Well, if you accept the premise that we began this whole thing with, about what's in it for me, and that no one cares about you unless what you've got is going to help them, I would never open any message without talking about the audience. So let's just say, I mentioned about being up there in this Yosemite and this fire and something, that's the story. So let's just say that's a good story. So maybe the opening should be like this. You made the effort to come to this meeting because you knew it was about how to grow your business in challenging times. And based on what you've experienced so far this year, it has been challenging for you, especially here in the Pacific Northwest. So one of the things that you're going to know in our discussion today are 3 simple things that you can do to make sure that you can grow your business no matter what it is, in spite of whatever the conditions are. And you're going to have specific examples of how you can use those ideas immediately. And hopefully, when our time is over, you will have experienced some practical things and you will feel so much more excited and enthusiastic about growing your business and sharing that wisdom that you've accumulated over the many years of doing what you do. Perhaps this story can start you on this journey and answer that first question, which is, what's the first thing that I should do? And the point of this story is what the first thing you should do when you're faced with a difficult challenge. So come back in time and imagine you and I are walking in Yosemite. And as you and I are walking around, you say, hey, Joel, look, there's a forest fire went through here, but I see a little green bud. And you call me over and we look at it, and sure enough, there's a little green bud sticking out of the ground. And then you say, I think it's going to come back. It might take a while, but it'll come back. And maybe that's what you need to think of. Maybe you need to be looking for a little green bud in your business that hasn't grown yet, but it will. And okay, so let's just stop there. So instead of opening with, so there I was in Yosemite, who cares?
Well, you know what I like about what I really like about that is that person that walks out on stage like that is what, in my mind, a speaker did years ago. And I'm not an extrovert enough to come out and do that. And because I couldn't be the actress on stage type of thing, it was really hard for me to get started. What really helps me is doing it virtually, where I'm in a comfortable environment. And we know that there's a lot of speaking that's going on virtually now. But the way that you demonstrated with teaching points and then bringing the story in to demonstrate a teaching point is something that would really resonate with me. That would work with me far better than coming out on stage with the big presentation.
So the suggestion is use your stories, but always open the story with a point. This next example, it's a story. The point of the story really is, it doesn't matter where you start, it's where you end up. Mm-hmm. Or the point of this story is how important it is to be persistent, to not give up when things get tough. Just think of how that setup gets the audience into the story before you even start the story, as opposed to the speaker who opens with a story and the audience is trying to figure out, what the heck does that mean?
Isn't that the truth?
I don't want to go to Yosemite in the middle of December. Yeah, what? That doesn't mean anything. And maybe if they're so dynamic and charismatic, they might be able to draw the audience in, and eventually now I get it. Yeah. But because we all have these devices and we can take our phones out and text and email, they're gone virtually or live right away.
They've tuned out.
But if it's relevant to them, it makes a difference. Now, you mentioned about being an introvert. And one of the premises I mentioned in the beginning, as you're watching and listening to what we're talking about, as a messenger with a mission, you have something that you want to share. And if you accept the fact that it needs to be about them, not about you, then how about how you are? You're an introvert, and let's say you're quiet and maybe you're monotone, which means one level of speaking. Maybe you're boring. People have told you you're so boring. You know, every time you talk, I fall asleep. Then you should speak that way. Wait a minute. Joel, you're a Hall of Fame speaker, a speech guy. You're telling me to speak as a boring person? Yeah, if that's what you're like, be what you're like. However, you set it up in the beginning. So one of the other suggestions is you should always be introduced. Somebody should set you up. And if it's an informal setting, it could be somebody on your team. It could be a customer. It could be a client. I've had some of the people that I work with in coaching, their spouses have introduced them, their children have introduced them, their parents have introduced them, but somebody needs to set up and give your qualifications, because an introduction is not a bio. An introduction sets up the message that you're bringing and prepares the audience for what they're going to experience. So here's the story to illustrate that boring is okay. Yeah. And the story, I've ended up calling it the Boring Bob story because that's what people remember. So Susan, come back in time. This was in maybe the late 80s, early 90s. And I was the closing speaker of a 3-day event for a Fortune 1000 company. And I was the last official speaker, and they were going to wrap up. So I was there all day on the third day, sitting in the front row next to the CEO. And at that point in the program, he said, "Oh boy, Joel, after the break, we have our chief financial officer come up and give a report. He's really a boring guy and everybody's going to fall asleep, but I got to do it. He's the only one that knows the numbers. He's the chief financial officer, but he's terrible." So it gets to the point of that part of the program. He introduces the CFO, says that these numbers are important, so please pay attention. Please welcome Bob. And Bob comes out with like a notebook in his hands, and he walks up to the lectern and he puts the notebook down and he just looks down and he starts reading and turning pages and giving all these numbers. And he was boring. So after the presentation, they had another break because it went an hour. And the CEO says, "Joel, would you coach him? I want to help this guy. He's got to speak every time we have a national sales meeting. He's the only one who can do it. Get him ready for next year." I said, "That's fine." So I contact Bob later that year and say that the CEO wanted me to help him. And he had heard my presentation and loved it. He said, "Sure, anything you can do to help. I know I'm terrible." I said, "No, you're not." I said, "You're boring." He said, "Yeah, that's what they call me, Boring Bob." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, that's my nickname in the company." I said, "Okay." So I gave him a plan of action. He said, "So are you going to change me?" I said, "No, I'm not going to change you at all. All I'm going to do is write your introduction for the CEO to read and give you an opening story. That's it. And then do exactly what you do every year." "Really? Just be boring?" I said, "Yeah, well, that's who you are. Look where it got you. You're the chief financial officer of this amazing company. You're good at what you do." All right. So here's the introduction, Susan. Just shorten a little bit. So a year later, the CEO gets up, says, "Okay, we're on a final day of the national sales meeting. And as you know, the next part of our program is where our chief financial officer, Bob, gives you the numbers. These numbers are so important to you. If you don't get these numbers right and understand why they were developed and how they work, you're not going to have a great year." Unfortunately, we all know that Bob is boring. As a matter of fact, in the corporate office, that's his nickname, Boring Bob. And what happens every year at this time in our national sales meeting? Bob gets up here for an hour. Everybody falls asleep. Nobody's paying attention because it's so boring. We have a new plan this year. Your assignment is, if the person next to you starts nodding off, your job is to wake them up. And then I wrote in the introduction, point to everybody in the front row. Now, for those of you in the front row, and I said, I want you to take your index finger and point to everybody in the front row. Those of you in the front row, your job is, if Bob falls asleep while he's talking, you got to run up on stage and wake him up. Well, at this point, the audience is roaring. And then he says, "And now, please welcome Boring Bob."
Oh, that is so
and he gets this big applause. So Bob comes out with his notebook. He waddles up to the lectern. He puts the notebook down. He doesn't look at the audience, no eye contact. He's looking down, and I had written this introduction for him. "Well, thank you for the introduction." And they do call me Boring Bob. But some of you know that Evelyn and I have been married 27 years. And I need to tell you that on our first date, she slapped me. I wasn't getting fresh. She just thought I was dead. Well, they just roared. And then I wrote, wait for the laughter to stop and then say, "Well, I'm not dead. I just sound like I'm dead and I look like I'm dead. But I am so excited to be here at this national sales meeting and share these numbers with you. But it doesn't show on the outside. It's all on the inside." So in spite of the fact that I'm boring, in spite of the fact that I don't have much enthusiasm, you need to be excited about these numbers because they're going to make your year a great year. And then he went into the exact same presentation. He got a standing ovation at the end of the talk. And then about 5 years later, I get a follow-up letter from the CEO saying, "Bob has fallen in love with your message of anticipating the boring part. Every year, he now opens with a new boring joke of how boring he is. He comes up after a 3-day event with over 20 speakers. He has been the highest rated speaker at every national sales meeting since that day, and he's still boring.
You know what I love about that, Joel, is that you allowed him, as you had mentioned earlier on another point, you gave him permission to be himself. And you gave him the confidence that just being himself was enough.
Well, when you think about it, that's all we have. And what do you call somebody who isn't themselves? A phony.
Yeah.
And
fraud.
in speaking, the greatest quality you can have, if you're a messenger with a mission to share that message within you, is to be credible. And the way you become credible is being congruent in being who you are. And if you are not an excited, enthusiastic person, put that out there. Like I wrote with Bob, it doesn't show on the outside, but inside, I'm very excited. And I think every person knows somebody like that.
Yeah.
Who is shy and not gregarious. And it's okay.
Yeah.
Because the hardest thing to do is try to be somebody you're not. So don't do that.
This has been so great, Joel. And I have one final question.
Sure.
It's actually a question that goes along with a pet peeve of mine. A lot of speakers use PowerPoint presentations, and many times PowerPoint presentations are something that really adds to the speaking process. But my pet peeve is when somebody just reads what's on the PowerPoint. Like I can read, I don't need for somebody that's a speaker to read it for me. What is your opinion on PowerPoint presentations, and how can a speaker use it in a proper format that doesn't put people where I am with a dislike of watching them read it?
Oh, that's such a great question. And so absolutely true. And matter of fact, I just did a new video for our members on that, on how to use charts and graphs. And we have a number of videos on how to make PowerPoint and slides really effective. And here's the basic premise. A visual must be visible. So it needs to be something people can see. Normally, what people have, they have 10 lines of text on a slide. And then if they're an accountant or somebody in the numbers business like Boring Bob, they say, now I know you can't see this. Well, then why are you putting it on a slide? If you have 10 lines of text, you should have 10 slides. A single thought on a slide. And the other recommendation about slides is never use a sentence unless it's a quote. So let's say on the slide, and I see that on the screen it says, this meeting is being recorded by the host or a participant. Okay. So let's just say that's what most people would put on a slide. Okay, if they just put that sentence on the slide. The way I would suggest you make that slide is meeting being recorded, or meeting dash recorded. Not a sentence. Eliminate all the little words, but then you would say, this meeting is being recorded by the host or a participant. So the slides become your prompts, your notes, but they should use visuals, an image that maybe shows a recording device, and a couple of simple words. So eliminate the words, eliminate bullet points. If there are 3 important things for you to know about, here are the 3 most important things about speaking. That should be 4 slides. Slide 1, 4 most important things about speaking. Number 1, know who your audience is. Next slide. Make it about them dash you in big letters. 3, be yourself. And a couple of images of people excited or boring, old or young. That's it. So you're right about that. So I'm so glad you brought that up, even though you're a writer and talking about books. It's got to be that way. And I think, if we were to just wrap this up, if what I'm saying makes sense and you want to take your speaking to the next level, I mean, you're serious about it and you're willing to invest in yourself, then you can set up a call with me. I'll give you a half-hour call on my calendar. Just go to talktojoel.com, talktojoel.com. That takes you right to my calendar link, and you can pick out a time and you and I'll talk about your speaking, your message, and how to fulfill your message, your mission to get that message out.
That's so generous of you, Joel. And that we will put that in the show notes.
Sure.
Your contact information. And in the show notes, there's always a way for people to be able to contact me if they want to learn how to write, publish, and promote the book that they're going to be remembered for. But Joel, do you have any closing thoughts for us?
Yes, I have 22 words. If you could summarize everything you know about what you know, your area of expertise, and put it in 22 words, what would your 22 words be? Well, here's what I came up with. Everything has taken me almost 50 years to learn about being an effective communicator and speaker are these 22 words. And here they are, Susan. Speak to your audience about what they need in an organized way they can follow, and get yourself out of the way.
Genius level. That was so clear. And isn't that really, as we've been talking about, clarity is what we need when we're speakers, so that people can understand what the message is and how it can help them. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Joel. And I can't wait for this to go live and for people to hear all the wisdom that you've shared with us today.
A pleasure.